Hello and welcome back to the Greenbrier Master video series on getting funded. This is the master video for debt funding. So let's dive right in. Okay, here again you see we called it commercial debt because we wanted to make sure that people understand that it's not a private debt and it has no relationship whatsoever to hard money. But we're referring to it in terms of the name of the video and so forth as debt funding because that's really what it is. Okay, a definition. Most people know this, but we're going to do it anyway. Borrowing from a bank to fund the startup and operating expenses of your company. That's what debt funding is, okay? And here again, we've shown this multiple times. Again, it's believable, even though it's 2014 data. It's U.S. Department of Commerce information, so you can trust it. And you can see here that even though most people think it's one of the more dominant, funding sources, it's really not. It's 14 billion, but essentially it's number 5 on the list. But again, it's just important for you to understand kind of where it fits, okay? Okay, how does it work? Pretty straightforward, and most people know this simply because it's of its similarity to, getting a mortgage or something else, even, getting a car loan. Banks provide funding in the form of a loan. Loans carry interest, and the interest must be repaid with monthly payments. We'll tell you a little bit more about that, but in some cases it gets rather complicated. A lot of banks today, especially the ones that do startup funding, they want automatic access. In other words, they want to be able to essentially debit your bank account, in some cases twice a month. So again, just another way for them to, kind of hedge their bet. Okay, submission requirements, not a whole lot of surprises here. Okay, a business plan and a video. They don't normally care too much about websites, okay? They're going to do a very detailed background check. You just need to understand this. Again, similar to getting a mortgage, they want to see, pretty much everything. You're going to need a credit score of 720 or better. No way to cheat, especially if you're less than 700 and you want to borrow money, then you should consider a hard money loan because primary debt funding, it's going to be from a major bank, S&L, credit union or whatever. It's just not going to happen at anything below 700. 700 to 720 is a maybe, and 720 plus, at least the FICO part of the requirement, would be considered to have been met. Okay. Proof of concept. Okay. In other words, you can't just be somebody going to a bank to borrow money if you haven't done a thing. Okay. They would like to see that you have a website, even though they're not going to require to see it. They would like for you to already be in business. Okay, so typically debt funding occurs after a startup is funded out of personal, savings and so forth, or friends and family, at least, to where you got to, again, what's called the proof of concept stage, where you're actually selling, the product or service is selling, you're making money, you're not profitable probably yet. The point is that's typically, what banks are looking for, as a stage or level of achievement, okay? Most importantly, they want to see the ability to repay the loan, okay? And, when you tell them that part of what you're going to be doing is using the money that's borrowed to pay back the loan, they kind of don't like that, okay? Some portion of it probably makes sense, but they want to see that, beyond that, especially if the money isn't used, to success, they want to make sure beyond that, assuming that money's gone, that there's still, a source that allows you essentially to satisfy, your debt obligation, okay? And this is not a maybe. They need collateral or cosigner. So the old adage that in order to get a bank loan, you need to prove that you don't need it, it's not too far from being true. Okay, again, you can't skimp on this. They're going to require one or the other, in some cases both. But you can't get a signature loan in 6 figures, to start a business. I don't care who you are. It's just not going to happen. Okay, They're going to want collateral, or they're going to want a cosigner, in some cases, both. Okay, where to go? Pretty straightforward. Go to the national banks first, S&Ls and thrifts, and certainly smaller state banks, from our perspective, are actually a better bet, because this kind of a loan is not a significant portion of the profit source, the revenue source for most banks, okay? The big banks, they really don't like to do it, okay? And it's typically something that they do kind of in spite of themselves. If you have a long-term relationship with them, maybe you have another business with them, they want to keep your business, and that's certainly a factor, okay? Credit unions are a great one, because typically you get a great rate from a credit union, and credit unions will do startups, believe it or not, okay? Okay, costs and expenses. What's it going to cost you? Very straightforward. The going rate, I think prime right now is about 5.5% interest, okay? The cost of requirements, meaning it's going to cost you what it takes, business plan, website, video, whatever, in order to essentially to make the pitch or to apply. Points and carrying expenses. Remember, in almost every case, you're going to pay what are considered points, all right? It's an initiation fee, meaning the actual portion of the debt associated with creating the note for your bank loan. It is essentially an upfront cost, which is not part of the interest, okay? So you have points and a carrying cost that goes with the interest that needs to be repaid, okay? And there's also typically penalties for early or late payoff, okay? What they want to see is your ability to continue to pay this even after you're successful. Now, in some cases, you can get an early payoff without penalty if you're making money and you don't want to continue to pay the interest, okay? All right, how to apply? Pretty straightforward. Again, think of this as if you're going after a mortgage. It's different, but the application process is pretty similar. All right, search and find a fit. And again, most people assume that they should go start with Bank of America or Wells Fargo or whatever. I recommend, and specifically we as a company recommend that you start with at least state banks and really, S&Ls, thrifts, and primarily credit unions. They're really a good way, to go get. Now, if it's a credit union, it's probably going to be a smaller amount. But again, you're looking to pull the trigger and get off, get out of the starting blocks and get going, okay? All right, contact them and make interest, or I should say get interest. When you actually have an opportunity to talk with them, explain what you're doing, who you are, what you're looking for, especially if you have a relationship, with that organization. Make sure you mention that too. All right, they'll ask you for the standard. All right, send them, typically by email, your business plan, links to the video, etc. All right. Have a phone conversation with them to see if it's even possible, see if it's in the cards, all right? Meet the lender, okay? And, again, somewhere along the line here in the process, they're going to want to see a complete financial background on you, including references and so on and so forth, okay? You actually meet with them, assuming you've satisfied all that, and make your pitch, and typically it's real straightforward. It's not a maybe. You're either going to make it or not make it. Either you're going to get the loan or you're not. Finally, negotiate a deal. Now, sometimes, you can't talk them out of an interest rate, but you can quite often, alter maybe the collateral or the combination of collateral and cosigner. But again, just be prepared, to make a deal. Okay, what to expect? Pretty straightforward. Okay, the average is 30K to 350K. You're never going to get a bank loan, for $1 million unless you're a multimillionaire, and you can put up both collateral, and personal signature. Okay, so most debt funding is done after the proof of concept happens, and again, it's between 30 and 350. Okay. It's going to be a less than 20% success. Again, just because most of the time banks really don't want to do it. Okay, they'll do it to keep your business, but especially the larger banks, they're going to tell you it's just not in the cards. It's not something they want to do. Okay, and again, you're talking about 2 to 3 months. Okay. Low interest from the banks. All right, now again, 5.5% compared to three and a quarter or three and a half or whatever prime is now, for a mortgage, is not thought of as being low, but compared to, the hard money lenders that are 9, 10, 12, in some cases even 15 to 18%, it is low. All right. Again, you can't skip on the resources. If it's going to happen, you have to be best in class. You really have to represent yourself well. Okay. And you need to react quickly. Okay. Normally they're going to make a phone call and say, can you come in this afternoon? All right. You better be prepared to show up. And it's better if there's more than one of you. Doesn't have to be, but you look like a startup team if there's more than one of you. Okay. Be prepared to make the pitch. Okay. You need to come across as being totally confident that you're going to be a success. Okay. Even if you really don't feel that way, or even if you're really not. All right. Okay. Pros and cons. Pretty straightforward, but it's worth going through these. The pros. All right. Again, if you're borrowing money, yes, you're paying it back, but nobody's in your hair. All right? In other words, there's nobody, the bank's not going to try to tell you what to do or how to do it. Okay. So you're maintaining control. Okay. Rapid timing. This is not going to take 5 or 6 months. Normally it's going to happen or not happen in less than 30 days. It's not considered income. Okay. When you borrow money, that money is not income. So you're not paying tax on those dollars. Okay. It's a low interest rate, certainly compared to, hard money or whatever. Now, another thing about taxes, the actual, the interest is just like your mortgage. The interest is tax deductible, even though the income is not. Okay, again, it's a 20% success rate. That's not a big number. We're showing it as a pro, as opposed to, for instance, a grant, which is less than 3% success rate. Okay, and finally, you're not giving up any equity. All right, so you don't have any of the issues, compromising, future funding, any of those kinds of things. Okay, the cons, they are what they are. No surprises here. It takes excellent credit. It's rarely done for startups. In other words, you need to be typically at proof of concept stage where the business is running and you're operating. You're making sales, generating revenue. You may not be profitable yet, but you're over the hump and the business is rolling. Okay. Debt must be repaid. All right, they're going to want to tie you up both in terms of corporate and personal, responsibility for the debt. And like I said, in some cases they go to great lengths to make sure they get paid. They want to debit your checking account and they want to have backup ways of getting to you. And again, all of those things are just part of it. Okay, you're going to need personal collateral. Okay, and that is not only business collateral. It could even be personal collateral in the form of, signing a second on your house, something of that nature. They're going to get collateral, okay? And recognize it is a cash drain on funds, even though most people assume that they're going to be making, the payments out of the funds that they borrow, but still, that's less money that you've got to invest in, in operations, okay? All right, here's the funding analysis. No surprises here. We pretty much already covered this, but we always go through this in detail. Number 9 is funding analysis, and as you'll see, the focus here is on debt funding, because that's the video that we're in. Maximum here is showing as 3 million. Realistically, it's more like 350 to 500,000. Debt funding in excess of $1 million is pretty rare, just so you'll know. Okay, and again, maximum timeline is 3 months. It's more like, from the time you identify, a particular bank source until you get a yes/no, it's typically less than 30 days. Okay, again, you saw this before. Probability of success around 20% or less. The process is moderately complex. The requirements are heavy. Okay, not because you're showing them your business plan, your website, and your video, but because they want everything about you and your team. If you've got 5 people, they want 5 financial statements. They want 5 sets of proof of income, 5 sets of tax returns, on and on and on. So that's why we define the requirements as being heavy. Okay, the indebtedness, 5 to 8%. Okay, and again, 5.5 I think is prime right now for a commercial loan, but it can be up to 8%. Okay, liability is both, meaning you're pledging both corporate and personal assets as a guarantor of the loan, and they want to, in some cases, they want you to sign sign over, in terms of collateral, everything. Not only your house, but your car and your furniture, everything else. All right. The liability, again, is both corporate and personal. All right. The equity cost, it's not applicable because you're not giving up any equity, to get the deal. Okay. All right. So in final summary, um, debt funding works. You can get a loan if your business is in operation, especially if you've done business, with the lending institution before, and it can be a good source. But again, it typically works if you have an excellent background, you have the collateral or a cosigner, you've got excellent credit, and the business is already past, a proof of concept. Okay. Getting the resources. Again, everything in here, with the exception of the financial statement, which is something you pretty much have to do yourself. I don't recommend having somebody else do it for you because they're going to get it from you and just put it in a form that they can submit it. So it's not any big surprise, in terms of, being able to do it yourself. Everything else, the website, the business plan, the video, etc., we can do all of that. So give us a call. All right. That's the toll-free number. You can call us, and again, click and go online. We are Greenbrier Consulting with a hyphen. So give us a call. We'd be happy to help you in any way that we can. Okay, so that is it for debt funding. All right, thanks for watching, and on to the next one.